Welcome to the second session of the Three Voices. The three voices belong to myself and my two good friends, Thomas and R.S., who realized that we shared a common passion, the quest to realize a more enlightened life. We all have developed our own observations and techniques to advance the goal of living life to its fullest. We plan to meet on a regular basis to share what we are learning about the benefits and obstacles to enlightened living. So welcome, everybody. So, RS and Thomas, you want to jump in and get us started?
Sure. No, the first, or at least from my point of view, the essential primary obstacle to enlightenment is ego, and um, and how ego processes our day-to-day experience. So, for example, we are three of us sitting here, and we have whoever you are out there listening. We're all in this same moment together. At the same time, though, we are not equally in the moment, although we are physically equally in the moment. We are not consciously equally in the moment. From my point of view, the observation that we make that our attention is not on the being aware of ourselves in the moment we're in, which is right now, it's rather in our head, most of the time going back and forth between the past and future. Blind are the eyes that see through the mind, and the ears deaf that hear through it. Because when we process reality moment to moment through what is in our head, which is 99% likely ego based, it means we are past tense in our perception of the reality we're in the moment.
Before you get deep into it, I would like to ask you, define ego. What do you call the ego? What is the ego?
Well, ego, from my point of view, is identity attachment to every thought, every feeling, memory, association we have in our mind. It's a life that we live in our head, but not in reality. And we assume it's the highest value of human enterprise because everybody values ego. We only believe in what gives us value. So people pursue all manner of beliefs, ideas, and so on throughout their lives in support of ego definition. So we are in a world in which ego has a great value. People determine their worth in the world by how other people see them and how they see themselves through what they have in their memory and expectations. This is not enlightenment. Enlightenment is not anything but what it is unto itself. It has no other attribute other than itself. What happens to us with ego is that we're constantly assigning to whatever we pursue that we feel has a higher value, a personal identity attachment to that value, and that is ego.
You're saying is this ego, this identity, is this Thomas? Is it not Thomas? I mean, is that who you are? I'm asking to understand ego by your term, because I'd like to use it as well, but I'd
No,
like to understand it.
Thomas, from my point of view, is what other people refer to when they refer to me. As I see myself, there is no identity in a higher state. And this is the problem in a way that a lot of people have with enlightenment, is that there's no identity there. And so when you said earlier, when we were talking, whether or not we should even pursue enlightenment, I mean, I can understand why people wouldn't want to, because enlightenment is a direct challenge to identity attachment. And we have not been taught from the time we're little to not attach to our culture, to our looks, to our dress, to our wealth, to our location where we're born, or anything else. We're not taught that enlightenment is an option, that non-attachment is an option. We're taught to attach, to give value to anything that we think gives us value, or we're told gives us value. This is misguidance.
That's interesting. Certainly respect that thinking, and I believe that the path we've taken from birth through being raised as a child, the environment in which we were raised, the family that raised us, and then our education, homeschool, high school, college, whatever the education is, if you will, the learning of that ego, that identity, uh, experiencing the world. I believe that to be a significant obstacle, as you do too. I don't know that I see it the same way you do. The ego is the self, that the ego is this identity that we've created or had created or has been imposed upon us by the world. And truthfully, enlightenment means to smash some of those bonds and chains and be able to live as a free soul, to shake away the chains of the past, of our history, and be able to act independently as an entity or being on the path. Enlightenment is the skis or the path down the mountain, and what we achieve going along that path: speed, strength, awe, wonder, joy, cold, hot, whatever our experiences going down the mountain, going along the path. That's enlightened living. And the true sense of enlightenment is to free oneself from all these affects or the chains of the past and the present. Rob, before I get too crazy into that, yeah, we should have you add to the craziness. I think if we ask 10 people, what does ego mean, we'd probably get, if not 10 different answers, 7 or 8. What do you think, Rob?
Without coming from a perspective of being too attached to my own ego and my ability to enlighten this conversation, I would say that I agree with you, let's not get boxed in. I've studied yoga and Buddhism and other things, and there are different points of view about this, maybe more nuanced in some way. So like there's a point of view that there are five causes of suffering. And one is ignorance, one is egoism or the I amness, one is attachment, one is being unreasonably repulsed by things or
Anger.
and then one is fear of death and the will to live. Again, not that this is formulaic, it's just a more nuanced conversation. And there is a sense that one can become aware of one's ego. I don't know that you have to kill it, but out of that awareness, there's a letting go of some of the binds around the ego and the ability to experience greater light, greater freedom from suffering, and so forth. So that's like the first thing I would say. And then there's like another point of view in Patanjali, for example, that says, well, there are 9 primary obstacles to the yoga path, and that brings in things like physical illness and apathy and so on and so forth. As we explore this conversation about obstacles, it could become nuanced. So I think there's more to it than just the word ego. It's the relationship one has to the ego that starts to get at more of this.
The ego is the entity and not necessarily the problem, because it probably is the problem, but those points, like you said, fear, ignorance, greed, desire, lust, well, not necessarily the worst thing in the world, which is inconsistent sometimes with the more holy ends of spirituality. But you're right, the obstacles are not the body itself, It's those rocks along the path: greed, fear. Perhaps we should jump in and play a little bit with how one handles them. The question we'll ask, and I'm smiling because it probably comes right into your next thing, Thomas. If one controls the ego or eliminates it, or eliminates its control over the entity, what's left? Is it a vacuum? You seem to have said it might be pure nothingness, meaning spirituality. It's the soul. When one controls the ego or puts it in check, it is now the realm of the soul that takes over. Okay. And how does that happen? Detachment. You said it. Okay. But my closing line on that thought is the way one overcomes these obstacles is to recognize them first, concentrate on them second, and then remove their effect on us. Be detached or separate from it. What do you think?
Well, very well said, I think, because the perception that we have from the time we're born is that ego is a standalone event, that it's the pinnacle of our identity. Whereas we know from studies, anytime we try and be in the present, because there's no past or future tense in the present, we slip a little further away from ego's hold on us. And at a certain point, after making many efforts to do that, it becomes clear that ego is a tool. It's something that we are programmed with or given to use to it's a food source in a way for higher states, because every time we try not to have an identity attachment to an ego requisite, that frees us for a moment from subjectivity. Because if you think about objectivity and subjectivity, not that this is a perfect description, but basically subjectivity is in our head and objectivity is outside of us. In a way, we could say that the laws of nature and from gravity or whatever, all these things are external to our head per se, in terms of our identity. So every time we're a little freer, a little less attached to our ego and more conscious of being aware in the present, that moves us a little closer to an objective point of view. In a way, it's like seeing things as they see themselves. Like, for example, all three of us are in whatever room we're in. Everything in the room is in the present with us. Everything about where we are is in the present with us, but we have very little awareness of all those things and how those things, whatever they are, relate to themselves. There's energy in everything. It means very simply not being in my head. Well, we have attention. From my point of view, we are at any given moment what we give our attention to. So in this moment, we're giving our attention to this conversation. And we can hear ourselves speaking and listening. At the same time, there's associations to what we're saying going on inside our head. Those associations in our head tend to attract more attention and more of our focus of attention than other things. And so if we observe ourselves more in our head, then we are conscious of being in the moment we're in.
I want to make sure I understand that last comment because I think it's important. So being in the head means that you are, if I may, distracted from being in the present.
Yes,
Okay.
that's a good way to put that. Yeah.
Or
Okay.
another way to put it, another metaphor that I've heard used many times is imagine an ocean with the many waves of the ocean, and the waves are like thoughts. And so when you're in your head, you often confuse the waves with the ocean. It's when you let the waves settle and the mind becomes still that you then are no longer in your head, but you're one with the ocean and one with your heart. And that's not a formulaic or a scientific way to look at it, but a metaphor that's often used. And then coming back to the word you use, RS, you use the word soul. So when the hold of the ego diminishes and you can have contact with your soul. Another way to say that is the present. You become present. Another way to say it is essence. Another way is infinity. Another way is light. There are many words that point to what I think is the same phenomenon. You were talking about detachment, and I think detachment is the opposite of attachment. How do you become detached? Well, you become aware of what you're attached to. And then you can, if you're aware of it, then you have the opportunity to go of it. And then there are various techniques, mind techniques, meditation techniques to actually let go once you become aware of it. Some
That's
of
very important, the
Yeah.
awareness
I-
part.
One,
Go,
one,
Thomas.
one example I like to use is that the ego is a little like a car. It's not the driver of the car. What we want is our conscious awareness to be the driver. Most of the time, what's happening is that the car is in charge. So the identity non-attachment to the ego is a little like looking at our car. We like our car, we use it, it takes us where we want to go. But do we derive an identity out of it? If we are, then the car is the driver and not us. So it's some of what you said earlier, RS, about non-attachment to the ego. It's going to be there. We need to use it, but we don't need to derive an identity from it.
That's why I asked you a little more in the beginning, Thomas, to define ego, because I think we use terms, define them very similarly, but we have, I think, back to the mountain, different paths going down it. Enlightened living is, in my mind, two steps. First, is the detachment to allow the driver to take over the car. Once the driver is able to direct the car, okay, then he begins another path of enlightened living. How do we take control of that car? How do we maintain or obtain that detached living? How do we free ourselves from the ego demands or controls? And it's not easy. Many truly enlightened people that we hopefully learn from talk about the practices of enlightened living as the same type of practice that an athlete does. Once an athlete, a basketball player, takes 1,000 shots, takes 100 shots a day, by the time he's taken 1,000 or 10,000 shots, he doesn't miss too much. He feels he's got a intuitive eye into the basket. And that's one of the things we should talk about as an obstacle. And that is persistence, practice. Too many people have the idea or want to become enlightened or free themselves from the bonds of ego, but they don't have the willpower to practice it. It's not magic. It doesn't happen by a wish. What do you think?
Oh,
I think that's good. I think the word earnestness is a cool word. You have to approach it with earnestness because it is not easy. There are many tricksters and many gotchas in this journey. In recent months, maybe even the past year, I've been intensifying my meditation, meaning more time doing it, trying to refine my technique. And one of the interesting things is in becoming aware of fears and anxieties and disturbances of one kind or another, it's almost like they become bigger for a time. Like I say, holy shit, I didn't realize that I'm that way, that I'm so hung up on this or that I'm so attached to this or that, or so adverse to this or that. And the more I see them with clarity, sometimes it scares me. I said, what the hell am I doing this for? I'm only uncovering problems. But in truth, I don't really believe, I know I am uncovering problems, but I believe that there's no way around it but through it. And so I'm willing to continue.
I like that. I like that. No way around it but through it. And you know, I really never thought of it that way, but it's pretty clear.
Yeah,
You
lovely.
know, if you're going around it, you're not dealing with it. So many people talk about fear. What do they say? What's the first thing when your dad, your mother, your teacher, your coach talks about fear? They say, face your fear. That's really what you just said, Rob. Don't go around it, go through it. You know, that's an obstacle we have to deal with.
You know, I just wanted to add, yeah, RS, this is a really important point because in my estimation, the greatest fear of the human people is fear of insignificance. The ego is the answer to that fear. And the ego is not the answer to that fear because in itself, it doesn't exist. So
Good
we
point.
are actually answering our fear with nothing. Although it looks like something while we're alive and we give it value between ourselves as a human community. But when we actually take the ego apart and look at what it's made of, it actually is not there.
Thomas, you kind of nailed it too, because you know, Rob, when you brought up fear, you did talk of the Buddha, and yes, it's a fear of death. In Buddhism, especially, they have quantified the fear of death as the primordial of fear. But I think, Thomas, you're probably a step ahead of Buddha here, that that it is insignificance. Or how about the opposite of it, vanity, meaning that I'm not insignificant. But the thing that stops people, or the obstacle along the way, is what will people think if I do this? Not everyone does this. Or is it cool to do that? Okay, what will people think? Well, the first answer to that is we don't care. It's not what others think about that. We need to work through that wall. We need to work ourselves. We need to see the world through our eyes, not others.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. And you hit it, Thomas.
Yeah. No, I was just thinking Shakespeare said to be or not to be. It's pretty basic. I mean, we're either here or we're not. We have a capacity for conscious presence, to consciously be aware that we are in this moment that we're in. We have this capacity. But how often do we actualize this capacity? Rob, like you said in the beginning, we have to first define what sleep is, what an absence of enlightenment is. And that's part of what we've discussed here.
The fear of insignificance, I do experience it. On the other hand, I find that when I let go, really truly let go and relax, that feels really good. You know, that's like, oh man, that fear is gone. And here I am right here, right now. And this feels good. That's really why, or part of the reason why I do this.
Oh,
You know,
that's excellent. That, you know, this topic could go on forever. And we knew that obstacles would be more than a one session thing. Because as we see, we're not just talking of obstacles, but we're talking about overcoming them. And on your last one, Rob, what happens when you break through that wall? When you go through it, when you face that fear, when you snap that ego, when you're in the present, Thomas. Well, what happens is it's a pretty darn good feeling. And a lot of us experience it different ways, each one to their own liking. You know, the eternal saint might think they're one with God. I'm very happy to smell a great flower, see a great picture, feel the great joy, like you just said, Rob. I think we'll have a lot more to talk about. Um, I would like to, if I may, gentlemen, always with the closing of the podcast, throw out a little saying. And I think I smile now as I think of it. You've heard it before, but I haven't said it officially. After listening to this session, someone could go back and say, they didn't say anything so profound. There's no secret. What's this esoteric enlightened path? It just seems like work to me. What's the answer? So, if I may quote from a rock opera, Tommy the Who, and Tommy sings, if I told you what it takes to reach the highest high, you'd laugh and say nothing is that simple. But you've been told many times before, messiahs pointed to the door, and nobody had the guts to leave the temple. Well, I'm free. That's Tommy. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're doing, guys. People, we want to share 3 different ways of feeling free, of walking out of the temple, not being just sheep of the ego, not being behind the driven car, Thomas. So with that, I offer my good night, gentlemen, and ask for whatever closing thoughts you have.
So I'm just going to repeat mine being as I tell my sons, be here now or be nowhere.
That's it.
Yeah.
What's more appropriate?
That works for me almost every time.
There you go. Rob?
Now that we're in the spirit of quoting lyrics, I would say, in the spirit of the Jefferson Airplane, the grass is green and you can make it grow, but you gotta let go. You gotta let go.
There you go.
Great.
And with that, fellow voices,
Yeah.
we leave until the next time. I bid you all adieu and hope anyone listening enjoyed it as much as we did. Good day.
Bye for now.